There it is. That's the lovely sound of we are live now. So welcome everyone. I see a lot of folks jumping in. We'll give everybody a few minutes to get settled and get moving, but excited to see people coming in. I think this is the most fun, but also awkward 45 seconds of any webinar as people are trickling in. So we'll kill the silence with two very quick questions that I'll ask everybody because it's always fun to do this. Considering all of us are at different locations, I'm going to start with Danny, and I'm going to go to Johnathan, Chris, and Sara. Danny, where are you currently located right now, and what is your favorite restaurant in said city?
I'm currently in Atlanta, Georgia. Favorite restaurant in Atlanta probably would have to be House Steakhouse.
Too good in Atlanta as well, so it's too easy to agree with that. Again, welcome everybody. We're getting settled, but while we do that, I'm asking around the room where we are and what's our favorite restaurant. Johnathan, what do you think?
Hey y'all, I'm just outside of Nashville, and it's hard to pick a favorite, but I had a burger at a spot called Jack Brown's the other night, and the best burger I've had in this city, so highly recommend it.
Ooh, I love that. Jack Brown's, Nashville. I'm heading up to Nashville soon. We have a team member up there, so writing it down. I love it. Chris, what do you think?
So I'm currently in San Francisco in a hotel room, but as far as a restaurant, I like Famous Dave's.
Can't go wrong with that. I'll be in SF next week, actually, so I might be hitting that one up. Last but not least, Sara, where are you and what's your favorite restaurant?
Sure. Yeah. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. And my current favorite restaurant is Osteria G in Holly Springs, which is neighboring. I'm from New York originally, and it has a very like New York feel, and I just absolutely adore it. It's also run by New Yorkers, so I love it there.
Too good. I love it. Well, I think we've given everybody at least a little bit of time to get in and get settled. I know folks will be joining as we go on. Glad this is being recorded so we can share it out with our teams later. But excited to dive into this topic near and dear to my heart, not only from being what I would call past RevOps and ops focused person, but now just more broad sense, being very focused on our go-to-market teams. But I think this is a very specific topic that a lot of folks, especially on this call, are joining to learn and understand how we can build better cohesion between ops and go-to-market teams. Before we do all that, my first narrative or my first thing to tell everybody is one, I guess, about myself. Hey, I'm Brad Smith, CEO, co-founder of Sonar Software here in Atlanta. Excited to be moderating this panel. The beauty of that is I'll be doing the least amount of talking, and all of our panelists will do the most. So I am excited for everybody to be on. The one thing I'm going to encourage everybody, especially on the attendee list, is be very interactive. We're going to launch a poll in a few minutes, so please participate in the poll. But just as important to that, by all means, ask questions, use the Q&A, use the chat. That's exactly what I'll be looking at while our panelists are answering questions. So all that being said, we will kick it off with some introductions. I will hand it over to Chris and Johnathan on the Spiff team to introduce themselves. Chris, I'll let you go first.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Smith. I've been in sales for quite some time. I currently lead the sales team at Spiff. Excited to have an opportunity to meet everyone today. Nice to meet you. Johnathan.
Right on. Thanks, Chris. I'm Johnathan. I run RevOps here at Spiff. I've been in the ops space for close to a decade now, and have definitely had my fair share of miscommunications and misalignment between ops and sales. So excited to kind of talk through some of those and the lessons learned.
Fantastic. Excited to have you both here. Sara, we'll start with you, and Danny, bring us home.
Great. Hi, I'm Sara Bush. I'm the head of RevOps here at Sonar. I'm still in my first 90 days here, but I've been in RevOps for about 3 years, a little over 3 years. Before that, I was a Sales Cloud consultant. Danny?
Hey everybody. Danny Garcia, VP of Sales over at Sonar. Excited to be able to meet with everybody here and hope to have a good time. So excited for the connection.
Fantastic. And we're excited to hear from everybody on our panel. Again, I promised a quick poll, so we will launch that right now. We would love to hear from you. Just at a very high level, how does your go-to-market team and ops team jive? What's that relationship like? Do they jive? just kind of in a binary sense. Do they jive in a great way? Maybe. Do they jive in an awful way? Answer no, if that's the case. If there's somewhere in between, please do that. But I think this is the most important place for us, especially to start, because believe it or not, while we all think that operations teams and sales teams are jiving, it's not always the case. And we want to make sure today, especially as we think about that exact topic, how we can be very prescriptive in our advice. I'm looking here at two groups of sales and operations teams that do jive very well, but we all have our ups and downs, and we're going to get into a little bit of that as well. But one more second for everybody. Looks like we'll show the poll results here in a second as well. Ooh, this is an interesting dynamic. 23% say yes, 8% say no, and right there in that middle of meh and shrug is close to 70% of sort of. So I'll be real honest. I think that is probably par for the course, especially in all of our walks of life as we talk to our customers on a daily basis, both from an operations perspective and a go-to-market team's perspective. That's normal. The reality is we are all running very, very fast in our jobs and in our day-to-day practice. And sometimes communication and building that strong culture of collaboration can be tough. That's exactly what we're going to talk about here today. So when we think about our first discussion point, we really want to understand, what are these real life stories that you've encountered of miscommunication between ops and your GTM team, and how do you overcome them? I think we want to obviously be great at storytelling, but more than anything, especially for our audience today, we want to be very prescriptive of how do we get through some of those rough patches. So I will turn it over to Danny and Sara. Yeah, I'd love a real life story about some of the challenges and miscommunications and how we overcome them.
Yeah, I'll kind of kick us off here. So the one that came to mind was pretty recent at the beginning of the fiscal year when we had just gone through Q4. We had rolled out a ton of different organizational changes. It was a new fiscal year. Sara had actually just started at the company. We had implemented and bought a ton of technology that we were starting to roll out or starting to implement. And I had this brainchild of an idea that I wanted to go into segmentation across the account executive team. And I spent weeks upon weeks kind of building out and orchestrating this master plan of how we're going to do it. And the day before I was going to roll it out, I ended up throwing a grenade into the whole process and just not rolling it out. And it was one of those like really demoralizing moments in my life, but at the same time, it's what needed to be done because there's just so much change happening at once. It didn't feel like it was the right thing to do or the right time necessarily, most importantly, to do at that current moment based on all the priorities that we had in front of us. And so that to me was a big level of miscommunication because I think I struggled, especially because I didn't want to throw a ton on Sara's plate right when she had just started. I think that was maybe week 2 that she was on board.
Yeah, it was.
It was a hard thing for me to just kind of, hey, take this on. And I was 90% of the way there. And so that was a miss on my end. It's particularly not really talking about the steps, the tactical steps of how we're going to orchestrate that overall. And so,
yeah,
Sara,
I mean, you did a great job of like, bringing me in, presenting me with, the plan, kind of like what you were going to do. And so I knew that on day 5 or 6 or whatever it was. But we didn't actually talk about the operational steps to implement it. And so we ended up, just pulling it back because, there are lots of questions and we didn't have the operational structure to do it, but it was, but you did a great job letting me know. That was a great step 1.
Yeah. I look at that and start to think that even while the best of intentions are there for our teams to execute at a high level, a lot of things come down, even during the right communication layers, a lot of it comes down to timing. Are we ready to implement a lot of these big changes that are foundational to how we do our business? And so I love that. I'll turn it over and ask the exact same question to Chris and Johnathan. Would love to understand a time where you've hit that pain point, that threshold that's frustrating, and where some of those breakdowns might have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead and start, and I'll share this as prior to Spiff, but I had an example in regards to our rules of engagement. There's a mid-market rep, mid-market AE that was working an opportunity, And it was currently in their market segment. They'd been working it. They had multiple meetings. They'd been on site. They were working with the main decision maker. Things were moving in the right direction. And halfway through the sales cycle, the prospect got acquired. Company got acquired. And so what happens at that moment, what happens? So the AE decided to go to sales ops and say, hey, this is the situation. This is what's going on. Sales ops said, okay, listen, I get it. They got acquired. They're moving into enterprise. We're going to give you until Q3. So we're in Q1 at the time. We'll give you till Q3 to close this opportunity. If it doesn't close in Q3, it goes to the enterprise rep. So we're like, okay, all right, this works. The mid-market AE and their manager are working together to figure out how to close the deal and continue to work through it. 1 week later, somehow the enterprise rep was involved in the opportunity. And we're like, what is going on here? This isn't. Sales ops decided, let's call a meeting with the mid-market AE and the enterprise AE. And so we had a meeting, and long story short, at the end of that meeting, the enterprise rep somehow got to work the deal from that very day. And it was just talk about communication. I mean, miscommunication. It was ridiculously crazy. But long story short, the agreement came down to where, hey, we're gonna double pay. We're gonna pay both reps commission on this opportunity, which sounds pretty good. But now the kick was, depending on the stage that the opportunity was in. This opportunity, I think, happened to be in like the evaluation stage. We're going to give the mid-market AE, this percent. They came up with some calculation that they never made up or never shared before, some small calculation based on the stage and all these other things. So the mid-market AE would get maybe 15% of the opportunity, but then the enterprise rep, upon it closing, would get the full 100. And that experience kind of shaped partially how I felt about sales ops, and I wasn't too happy. I happened to be the mid-market AE at the time. This was years ago. But long story short, I guess, what we could have learned? Well, clear communication, better ROE, what happens in this scenario. And I know some things just happen and it's hard to get ahead of it, but it was quite the experience. And long story short, the deal did close. But the mid-market AE, I think, got the shorter end of the stick because of that. So that was the real life story, man. It was painful story.
A story that we have heard all too often, and I feel like I could see Johnathan's hands probably sweating as you tell that. Johnathan, inside that story, we'll go into more of this in the next couple of steps. But curious to get your thoughts on that, just knowing how you've navigated that before, especially.
Yeah, totally, Brad. I appreciate that Chris shared a mess that wasn't mine to clean up, but we're certainly not immune from those types of disasters here too. And so, yeah, I think even recently here at Spiff, we've done our best to outline and identify an exhaustive list of rules of engagement. But like Chris said, sometimes you can't foresee some of those circumstances that pop up. So recently, one of the things that we've been experiencing is, I'm enriching our database on either real time or at least on a weekly basis. And so as we've territorialized and segmented our teams based on market sizes, a rep may be engaged with the deal, and then through organic growth, through Chris's, example there, through acquisition or whatever it may be. Now this company has changed size, the HQ headquarters has moved, whatever it is that would cause it to have to potentially be reassigned, has caused, at least, one particular issue that I can think of. And so I think more than anything, so much of this boils down, coming back to just communication and over communication. But I think even in preparation for this discussion, what I've been more aware of is, okay, so we addressed this issue head on. We talked about it with the AEs involved, with their managers, but did we do a good enough job of also then kind of sharing that to the broader audience, making sure that as a sales leadership team, everybody was engaged and bought into the decision we made around how this changes our ROE? Did we just update a PowerPoint, deck that was shared at SKO where we laid out the ROEs, or did we actually go and enable our team to make sure that they all understood like how it impacts them moving forward? So communication, above all else, with making sure that you're hitting your team where they're at is super important too.
Absolutely. I can't help but bring up, and live example here, we've got 5 folks on this panel, and Jesse in the background helping us orchestrate all of it. None of us are the same room. And we've all lived with that over the last couple of years when it comes to communication. And I think if there's anything that we've all taken away, and I'm sure Sarah and Danny are going to laugh the minute I say this, but we say it all the time here. If you feel like you're over communicating, you're likely communicating probably just enough. So if you ever feel like you're just, beating the same drum all day long about it, that's okay. You would rather be overly communicating that way than under, and just making sure that those things come down. And I think Chris and Johnathan, both in that example y'all shared, I look back at that. We all can be very pragmatic and very prescriptive in the way that we suggest how our teams run. ROEs are a great example of this, right? But at the end of the day, we can't scenario model everything. We could probably get, probably 2 or 3 nines out of it. 99.99% of scenarios we probably have a good handle on. The reality is something new is going to come out of left field. And I think how we do what we do is just as important as what we do in general. And communication is fully baked into that. And you have to be able to communicate effectively in order to get that sort of stuff done. So love those answers from everybody. And as we move into the sort of the next stage of this, the next question, we're going to keep resurfacing some of those stories and some of those examples. But when you think about the proactive steps that could be taken to create that culture that fosters that trust between these teams, I think in both of those stories, everybody had the right intentions and everything was supposed to be happening the right way, but there's obviously some breakdowns. And so when we think about learning from our past and how we can do this proactively, would love to hear, and we'll start with Chris and Johnathan on the proactive steps that you can make sure that as you're building that tight unity and cohesion, how are folks, especially our attendees here, and they're going to be watching this as a recording, what steps can they take to create that proactive culture?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll start. One thing that Jonathan's done a great job of is, he's got a weekly RevOps sync where he meets with the sales leaders every single week, just to kind of go through and find out, what's working, what's not working. He's always bringing information there. And I think, again, that open line of communication, that over communicating, I'm glad you said that, Brad. That's one of my favorite things to say is we need to over communicate. And he does a really good job of that. And that's actually one way to foster that, that trust between, and create that culture, because again, we're just open. We're here to try to make this company the best that we can. And we can't do that if we can't communicate and work together. And Johnathan?
Totally. Yeah. Over communicate, whether it's weekly time with your leadership, and then you expect that, information to trickle down to their team members. And to be honest, I'm sure at some point your companies will scale to a point where you can't do this, but we still, are very intentional about making the time to have kind of these all hands calls, these town halls, at least department wide, on a bi-monthly or monthly basis, just so that the most important things we can just make sure that they're hit. And these are things that we prioritize as a team to carve out time to make it happen. So that, along with other forms of asynchronous communication updates, that type of stuff that we can do in dedicated Slack channels for our teams. I think it's just, again, I mentioned earlier, but making sure that you're kind of multi-threaded there in your approach and reaching your end users, your stakeholders, and where they're living.
I apologize. Could I share one more thing, Brad? I apologize. Johnathan does another good job of sending the agenda out ahead of time, and that agenda is editable, right? He allows for the sales leaders and everyone else to put down things that they want to discuss and talk about, or concerns they may have. And I believe that's part of it. Even though it's his meeting, it's our meeting together, and that's so powerful.
Absolutely. I personally love a good pre-read. If I'm coming into a meeting or coming into anything, and we do this at the board level, we have our board meeting next week. They get our deck and all of our narratives and all of our agenda well in advance of that. It just makes that meeting run so much smoother. And again, it's another step of over communication, which is no such thing, right? But I'll flip it over to Sara and Danny on the same question. When you think about these proactive steps that we can take, what comes to mind and what do you put into practice?
Yeah, I'll take this one to start with. So on the heels of, us pulling back segmentation, Danny and I got together and we talked about, okay, obviously we need to make sure we're doing a better job communicating, even though, again, week 2. But we set up just regular meeting cadence. So we have weekly one-on-ones. Also made sure that I was fully ingrained into the team. So invited to every sales Slack channel, and just making sure I was really working side by side with them. And also just honestly a verbal commitment to like not rolling anything out without each other's knowledge ahead of time. So anytime we're planning to do something that would touch the, the other team, we just need to make sure that we're a concerted front, and we talked about that a lot and make sure that we do it. And then one other thing is to make sure that I don't lose touch with what's happening, because frequently I think in my role, I'm talking with the leadership team and the people who are making the strategic decisions. I've also added in like a 30-minute weekly meeting with the frontline folks, and literally just say like, walk me through your day. Like, let me see how you're navigating things. Like, let's talk about the challenges. And then I record those and then go back and see, okay, what can we put into practice to make life easier on our frontline people?
I absolutely love that. I'll summarize a little bit at the end, but just that ability to stay in the weeds. This is the hardest skill that any operations person has to have, is how technical and tactical and, down to the 1 inch mark, like how tactical can you be, but also being to elevate and zoom out and be very broad thinking. So I love that, Sara. Danny, same thing. When you think about that on the other end of building that culture, what comes to mind?
I'm just going to echo what Sara touched on. And I think it's one of those things that it may seem small, but it makes a big difference when you think about how the team is operating with one another. I think we all get calendar fatigue or meeting fatigue. We're bouncing around to one Zoom room to the other, and then you look up and you've got 30 Slack messages or whatever communication that you're using to, communicate across the entire organization. And when you look at that, it's very easy to be lost in having someone like Sara to be able to say, hey, did you see these messages come across? I'm already working on it. And it's like that communication is key and pivotal to make sure that like we're each other's eyes and ears on the floor, even when someone maybe heads down working on a project or in a meeting or whatever it may be, just being able to cover for each other in those areas. And then just having the steps of the verbal commitment of like, my favorite thing to ask to the team is, have you talked to Sara about that yet? And it's just one of those things that if it hasn't happened yet, then that's the next step for us to be able to progress this project or initiative or whatever it may be. Because without her buy-in or the commitment around that, it's not going to get rolled out effectively, or the buy-in, or it's not going to be rolled out right. So it's the little things that matter. I was told once that shavings make a pile, and you can make a good pile or a bad pile. It's up to you of how you want to interpret that or what direction it goes in.
I completely agree. I think we actually have a couple of questions coming up, which is fantastic, because I was about to say to the entire audience, please ask questions along the way. So we'll take a quick break from our next question and ask this live, because again, we're putting on these webinars to help answer questions for ops and sales leaders alike that are joining. So the first question that just came in, and I think this is great because we talked about communication across our levels, but we want to make sure that we're thinking about it from the leadership and stakeholder level. So how do you get leadership and stakeholders on the same page? This person's been in an ops role a few times where stakeholders latch on to the next shiny object rather than being comfortable tabling something for later. So gosh, what a great question. Tactical reprioritization is a sticking point on that. So Sara, I'm going to pointedly ask you this because I also have a thought in it. But yeah, when you think about getting that leadership and stakeholder mentality on the same page, what comes to mind for you and how do you accomplish that?
Yeah, no, this is, obviously, I think it's one of the biggest challenges in RevOps, but trying to make sure that there's, I write fierce prioritization is like so important. And, keeping a list of all of the requests and understanding what the main objectives are for each of those departments for the quarter, right, as the quarter starts. And then making sure that when somebody comes to you and says, like, come help us, fix this fire, you trade that out. Like, that means that you have to say no to other things and ask your teams to reprioritize. But, definitely if you get some quick wins in the beginning, like for me, like as I'm onboarding, and just making sure it's very, very clear on the communication side, what we're working on and why, and making sure that those objectives roll up to the company-wide objectives as well is super important. And then just continuously referencing that, like, sorry, the answer is no, unless you want to drop something else.
Yeah, I completely agree. Chris, Johnathan, Danny, I'm not sure if y'all have any thoughts or add-ins on that as well.
I think Sara hit the nail on the head with that last point there, which is making sure that it aligns with your overall business objectives and those department objectives. I think if your leadership team is bought into really that wholly conclusive revenue focus, then your teams will understand, okay, if we give here, then we take there. And your job in RevOps is to just help align those teams and bring that change to life.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's funny. I'm looking at this other question that just came in as well, and it's so synonymous. It's almost the same answer, but I'll read it and then I'll just kind of reiterate what we just all discussed. But when you think about this wider communication strategy across very fast-growing companies, like 5 new employees plus per month, it's tough to get everybody on the same page. And how do you bring those new stakeholders along with you on that ride where they're kind of starting into the middle of a project? They're not the beginning of it, they're not the end of it. I think, just to reiterate that, is that constant communication that is going to be key to it, but also, just this ability to say no a lot of times, because when I read that, especially with somebody new coming into a project, they're going to have thoughts, they're going to have ideas, they're going to have mentalities. It's not be dogmatic and come in and just say no and bang the gavel and move on. It's, hey, we're going to hear you. If it's a great idea that can fit into the current scope of this, great. If not, we're going to have to politely say no, because we have goals to go hit. We have a timeline to go hit on this. And I think I literally wrote it down, Sara, fierce prioritization. I can't agree with you more of that, because inside of that comes the ability to say no. And if you're able to say no and say it with grace and still have buy-in from everybody, that's one of the biggest pieces to it. So completely agree wholeheartedly on that. We're gonna go to the next.
Good.
Say it again.
That's good for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Sara knows how to say no. She says no to me all the time. So, as we move into this last question, we're going to come back to the one other question that just came up in the Q&A because they're tied together. But when you think about some of these biggest disconnects, I'd like to understand what they are and really how we can tackle these issues head on. I think so often, especially in our stage of life between Spiff and Sonar being similar stage, time is money. We have to act quick. So I'll start with, we'll actually start with the Sonar team again. So Danny and Sara, then we'll let the Spiff team bring us home with it. But what are some of those biggest disconnects that ops encounters with the other teams, maybe in go-to-market, maybe broader throughout the whole company? And how can these issues be tackled head on? Danny, I'll kick it over to you first.
Yeah, I think when you look at the biggest disconnects that ops encounters, it always goes back to me in terms of the shiny objects. Somebody has a bright idea when they're working out, or in the shower, or whatever it is, and it's just like, ooh, I thought about this today. And then you bring it up and you expect everyone's buy-in, and then the second layer thought around is like, how does it align to the other priorities that we have going on? Does it align with the other priorities that we have going on? Or is this something that I just thought in my own little silo? And for me, it's one of those things that I always think about is like, is it kind of my ego getting in the way? It's like, I think this is a really good idea, and do I need to let that go? Because if it doesn't go into the North Star direction that we're marching towards, I just need to drop it and just realize that it wasn't that great of an idea, and then move on from it. And then I'll have another shiny object, and then I'll drop it, and then wash, rinse, and repeat that. And then you start realizing what's really important. And so luckily having a good team of, honestly, I think one of the first conversations that Sara and I had with each other was like, hey, tell me no, feel comfortable telling me no. Like, I welcome it. I need to hear that, because if I do get caught up with my own momentum, I need to get brought back into reality. And so it's an area that we have to consistently look at and see, is this the main focus, and is it driving towards that?
Yeah, and Danny's been such a great partner in that. And I can say that for all of the team here at Sonar that I work with. It's pretty amazing how willing people are to, say no to the things that are like, we talk signal, or, noise versus signal. We talked about that in our leadership meeting last week, and just really trying to sift through, like, yes, there are these tiny little things, but they could take up a lot of time. And are they driving towards our main objectives? And Danny has been great about hearing me say no. He's been really, really receptive. So it's been very refreshing.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you the high five on that too, Sara, because it's not always just no, it's no, and here's why. And so I think answering that why inside of it just comes down so much to how you carry yourself and how you present that to whatever party, whether it be go-to-market teams. We had a question about enablement as well, so we'll get into it in a second. But so much of it comes down to answering that why just as much as the yes or no. But yeah, passing it over to Chris and Johnathan as well. When you think about those biggest disconnects and how do you just tackle them head on, what comes to mind for your team at Spiff?
Let me go first, Johnathan.
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me is just the functional silos that can exist in different departments. I think one of the main goals of RevOps is to tear down those silos and bring that alignment. But you as the intermediary, or your team in ops as the intermediaries, they're still kind of experience those siloed bits of information and communications. And then again, your goal is to bring them together. So I think just understanding what is happening in each of kind of the worlds of your stakeholders, and being able to like shine a light on that, help them understand, oh, sales is talking about this, but this is how it's going to impact CS. Marketing is talking about this, but you know, the SDRs need to know this when we're asking this question. All those things, somebody, you know, in a role like mine is going to hear all those bits of conversation, or many of them, and need to make sure that they can kind of bring them together, and then again shine that light to make sure that the right people are hearing that news, and be as proactive as you can. But ultimately, there are always going to be those times where you miss, and then it's about, okay, let's own it, let's fix it, and how can we be better next time.
Well, Chris,
I feel like everyone has taken my answer. I wrote down a few things. I was thinking to myself, we've got to be in alignment, right? I think that's one of the biggest disconnects, is that we're not aligned, or we think we are, but we're really not, or maybe we don't even really think about it. Silos, right? We operate in our own area and thinking about this will be good for us, but what about the greater team? And I think that's one of the biggest things is, you know, everything that we do, you know, how does this affect, and Johnathan, you mentioned it, how does this affect the CS org? How does this affect the BDR team? How does this affect sales? And so we should all be, you know, have one common goal in mind, and that's extremely important. So when it comes to disconnects, to me, I think it's the fact that we're operating in our own bubble, and we forget about everything else that's going on around us, you know. And I'd say, you know, ops is not the only one that's, I mean, I'd say there's disconnects on the sales side. It's disconnects everywhere, but I think we all need to operate better and really understand, hey, this is bigger than just me. We've got one common goal as a company, and how does this help us drive and get to that goal?
Absolutely. I'm gonna kind of boil both sides of that conversation down into just one statement. And it's something we actually, as Sara mentioned, we had our leadership offsite last week. We talked about this. So much of it comes down to what we call consider the impact. And I'm going to go back to exactly what Danny said a second ago, because it was a direct call out to me. Nobody else knew this is a call out. But when you talk about like, oh, somebody has a great idea and they like send me a Slack or an email, Danny and Sara both know this. Typically that from me comes between 5:45 in the morning and like 7 a.m. It's when I'm usually like working out or like on the Peloton, and I'm quickly pulling up off of it, and I'm like slacking in, like, oh, here's a good idea. But even for myself, I'll call it out. It's not the best thing for our business. And here's why. I could have a great idea, but if I don't consider the impact that it has on Danny's team, or it has on Sara's team, or on the finance team, or on the success team, we're talking about enablement a second ago, where they fit in, and we're going to get into it in a second as well. If I'm not considering that impact when I fire off that email or Slack or text message, I might put people in a spiral and put them down. And that's not good. I need to tackle it head on myself and just consider that impact well before I send that email. It's probably a good idea that I had somewhere along the line in my weird brain at 6 in the morning, but I need to formalize it and really present it the right way. So we're moving into sort of the Q&A. We got about 10 minutes left, so we'll do a little bit of rapid fire, but I will assign these questions to anybody, so just jump in whenever you feel compelled to share your thoughts. But Andrew Groover just jumped in, and I absolutely love it. You know, we talked a lot about ops and sales. Where does enablement fit into this? And this is another question that we had come through the Q&A as well, so kind of killing two birds with one stone. Enablement side is a big piece to this puzzle between how sales and ops works. So I'm really curious to know, where does enablement fit in? And inside of that, who owns some of that technology behind that enablement?
I can take a quick stab at that one, and it's because it's kind of a recent change here, but we've tackled that organizationally or structurally. So we've recently brought in a new leader in a position of vice president of enablement and ops, because we do see those things as so intertwined, where ops is kind of the hands and the feet behind the scenes building, and enablement is rolling out and successfully helping our reps take advantage of some of those processes or the tech that ops may be pulling the strings on. So I think that those things, as married as they can be, you're only going to see benefit from that in your teams.
Yeah, Chris, might be on mute.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're good. I can hold mine. Do your thing.
Oh, no. I didn't know if you, if I saw you talking, so I'll definitely pass it over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking about enablement, and I feel like we all are a portion or a part of enablement, right? We all in our own little area, but I also believe that when it comes to enablement, which is very, very important function, when they get in really, really well with the frontline managers, I feel like that's when they are at their best, right? Because I feel like enablement it's a great function, and just like any other, Brad was having his example. He's on his Peloton, got great ideas. I think enablement does they've got great ideas as well. But again, we need to make sure that we consider everyone that's involved and get in with those frontline managers, right? That's going to definitely help push the vision and push what we need to do. But I wanted to throw that little nugget in there. I mean, enablement's a great function based on when I think the question was around who's responsible for the technology piece. I think enablement, they typically will bring those up, but again, ops is there with them, right? So I think, as Johnathan was mentioning, we've got a very unique role right now where we have a VP over ops and enablement, because again, they do work hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be one of those evolving questions as well, or answers, better said, because I think inside of that, we talk about, does enablement truly sit under sales? Does it sit under operations? Does it sit under revenue operations, which is a new department that we see just emerging through everything? I won't go too polarizing of a question. Does RevOps sit under sales or under operations, or we won't go to that reporting structure question because we probably don't have enough time. But I'll answer it the same way as always. I think it's relevant here. It depends. And that's such a cop-out answer, but it does depend on where your company is from a growth perspective, what your company solves for. Danny and Sara and I talk about this all the time. Yes, we serve other software companies, but we also serve a lot of other industries. And it's fascinating watching how someone can use Sonar at a company like Penske, who's a national trucking company, which is a totally different RevOps framework than what we see in the SaaS operation side of things. So again, when I say it's all depends, it all kind of depends on where your company is. This next one.
Yeah, or Brad, I report to the head of product and engineering, which is not something that's like a normal reporting structure, but it makes sense for our business.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense for us. So, this next one, and I'm glad Matt asked it. How do you balance working through the requests from the team versus suggesting areas of improvement? And he put a really good example here. I equate this to the difference between engineer and an architect. But this is a very unique question when you look at this audience, because we got folks from obviously the operations side and from the sales side. Y'all are both fielding all these requests. How do you separate some of that signal from noise, but also how do you balance working through those requests on a daily basis?
I'll take this one. I think this is a really crucial point. And I think a lot of the quick wins that leaders can take or achieve by listening to the front lines is right here. When you look at the requests from the team, going back to what Brad mentioned earlier, it all depends. I think it depends on who's saying it. If they are specific reps or individuals that are bringing things to the table, not just to bring things to the table, but because they're actually getting caught up in their world and not being able to move forward in terms of whether it's prospecting or whether it's moving ops from one stage to the next, like it's happening for a reason. And if it's being brought up from multiple people, it's not just people complaining, it's a pattern and it's an issue. And this goes back to, we have to kind of bring ourselves back down, because I'm a rep at heart, and when I bring myself back down to that day in, day out of whatever I was doing, calls, jumping into prospecting and bouncing around, there are issues that I ran into, and if I'm taking the time to actually put that out there, it's because I feel strongly about it, and it's something that's preventing me from doing my job and being successful. And as leaders, if we don't look at that or look at it from that lens, I think that's a big miss. And so I try and take those little requests, or not little requests, but those requests, aggregate them into themes. And if it's something that I'm seeing like repetitively, then it's something we got to tackle. And it's something you need to take serious.
It's a great answer. I mean, if you think about it, these are the people that are on the phones all day, right? They're there in the trenches. And you're right. If you're hearing it, commonly, it's definitely something that I think should be considered. The question is, how do you balance that? I think it's a happy balance, right? I think you need to do a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But the quickest way to lose your people is to not listen to them, right? And so I think, it's important to make sure you have an opportunity for feedback, or have an area where they can share those requests or share the things that they're hearing. And then again, like Danny said, let's go ahead and let's look and see all the data, and then begin to draw a conclusion based on the data that we see. But that is a very, very good question. And I think you need to do a little bit of both.
Absolutely. What's funny, Chris, I was waiting on Johnathan or Sara to say, this is too easy. We make this as a data-driven answer. We take all this feedback and we aggregate it. We look at it. Is it actually signal or is it noise? But you, high five. You just, you dip that toe into the operations world to be very data-driven and answering the questions from a data perspective of it. So Johnathan, Sara, I didn't know if you got anything to add to that.
I've got a non-data answer, the more qualitative piece, which is, so we use the OKR framework for goal setting. And so I think that knowing that our OKRs are going to be tied back to our overall business objectives, that can be a North Star when you're being pushed and pulled between different things. But I think you're likely in an ops role where you can't just be 100% focused on your 3 or 4 quarterly OKRs, and you've got these daily fire drills. And so I do my best to try to put each of those requests through this lens. If you were to chart them on a matrix of what's urgent versus what's important, and you can have not urgent and not important, you can have important and urgent, and look for those areas where you can start to help prioritize. It's obviously more beneficial if you can then share how you're prioritizing with your team, like what the backlog looks like, and why you may be saying no or not right now, but ultimately it'll all come back and tied to those business objectives.
The only other thing that I would add is yes to all of that. Just like a super tactical thing that I have found helpful is when you're taking a look at, I've always done like sprint planning, well, since I could, and basically being very, very intentional about my time and my calendar. So I have these big projects that we've decided to do based on, our departmental and company-wide goals for the quarter, year, whatever it might be. Estimating time, which is, by the way, whatever you think it is, times 3, and then blocking time out on my calendar to actually achieve those objectives. Otherwise, I could get really distracted and just put out all the fires, but making sure I leave time in my calendar to actually put out the fires when there are them. So just being really, really intentional about my time has been helpful.
Absolutely. If you're this pie chart diagram, we always talk about a proactive and reactive. If you could take all the requests in the world that you want, then that backlog gets really full really fast. But if you're not intentional and proactive enough to set out your time to go accomplish them, you're gonna do a lot of backpedaling and not running forward. So we've got exactly 1.5 minutes. So in that last 1.5 minutes, my last question for all 4, and we'll start with Sara and go Sara, Chris, Johnathan, Danny. We talk a lot today about building trust and building culture in between ops and your GTM teams. In a tweet-worthy length, so I think it's 140 characters. I'm terrible at Twitter, so y'all can probably correct me on there. But in a tweet-worthy statement, what is your one bit of advice for our audience on building that trust between operations and go-to-market teams?
Yeah, again, I think it's alignment on goals, and alignment and agreement to say that you're going to not execute on things unless you guys are on the same page.
Completely agree. Writing these down. Alignment on goals. Completely right. Chris, what do you think?
Be vulnerable and over communicate.
short and sweet and to the point, got it 140 characters, be vulnerable and over communicate. I love that. Love it. Johnathan, what do you think?
Love that. I'm piggybacking and also kind of contradicting just a bit by just saying there to take what Brad I think said earlier, you really can't over communicate. So continue to just go out of your way to make sure that all of your stakeholders understand what you're trying to get across.
I love it. Over communication does not exist. That is not a thing. We've banged the gavel. We have accomplished that today.
Yeah.
Danny, bring us home. Tweet worthy thought.
I think for me, it's assume, be open and assume that other people have better ideas than yourself.
I love that. Assume that other people can have a better idea than yourself. What a great, humble way of thinking about it too, because candidly, we're only getting smarter by the people that we surround ourselves with. So speaking of that, we are at the top of time. I know there are a handful of questions that didn't get answered, but would love if anybody has additional questions. We dropped the links to Danny, Johnathan, Chris, and Sara, their LinkedIn. Please connect with all of us. Feel free to tackle these questions offline, but certainly appreciate everybody's time, effort, energy coming today. Thank you all for attending. We'll follow up with you soon. And any questions, spiff.com and csonar.com. But hope everybody has a great rest of their Tuesday. Talk soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.